Welcome everyone to the Make in NCRT YouTube channel. So today we are going to study the second chapter of class 6 NCRT book of the history subject. So let us begin with the chapter. The name of the chapter is From Hunting, Gathering to Growing Food. We see that at the start of the chapter there is a small story about Tushar's train journey. Now, in here, Tushar wonders that long ago, when there were no means of communication such as trains, cars, now how did people travel from one place to another, and why did they do so? So, in this chapter, we are going to find out about the reason of people traveling from one place to another. The starting portion talks about the earliest people. Why were they on the move? uh, in the subcontinent, we see that people lived from as early as 2 million years ago, and they were primarily hunter gatherers. Now, these people, the name of these people is hunter gatherer because they went to play different places and just they sustained themselves on the food that they hunted or gathered from nature. It says here the names come from the way in which they got their food. Generally, they hunted wild animals, fruits, roots, nuts, and leaves, and so on. These hunter-gatherers they moved from place to place, and there are many reasons for this movement. So we will read about those. First, they if the hunter-gatherers if they stayed at a place for too long, they would have used up all its resources including plants and animals. So they had to move from one place to another so that, over a period of time, the resources at a place get replenished. The second reason is because, the hunter gatherers they hunted animal, fish, so they had to follow their prey. Wherever these animals went, the people followed behind them. See that is why those who hunted them had to follow their movements. The third reason is because we see that different plants and trees they bear fruits and grains in different time of the year in different seasons. So the hunter gatherers had to shift from one place to another according to the different seasons so that they could enjoy the fruits of nature, the different fruits, grains, and all these. And lastly, one of the major reasons for the travel or migration of people of the hunter gatherers from one place to another is in search of a source of drinking water. Because drinking water is a very essential part of our lives, that we see that many of these hunter-gatherer tribes they lived beside water bodies, fresh water bodies such as rivers, lakes, and some of these water bodies were perennial. That is, they had water throughout the whole year, while others were seasonal. So we see that during the dry season, when these kind of seasonal water bodies were dried up, the people had to move in search of another source of fresh water. So overall, these are the major reasons why these hunter-gatherer tribes had to, migrate from one place to another. Now, in the next section, we see that how do we know about these people? Now, archaeologists have found some of the things hunter-gatherers have made and used. These things include like tools of stones, wood, bone, and so like these are the evidences that we have of that time, because during that time no written records as such are left, and people did not write anything as such. No written language was still not there. So these tools made by the people, that is the stone tools, the tools made from bone, these are the only remains that we have to get to know about the Stone Age people, hunter gatherers and so on. Some of the stone tools were used to cut meat and bones, scrape the bark of trees, and chop fruits and roots. So we see that different types of tools were used for different purposes. Like some were used to cut meat, and some were used to cut wood and scrape the bark of the wood. Some were used to chop fruits and vegetables and so on. We also see that some other types of tools, small pieces of stone that were sharpened, were also used to make spears and arrows that were used for hunting. Now, these tools, and other than that, some tools were used to chop wood, and this wood was used as a firewood. That is to keep themselves warm, and as a source of light, and to drive away the wild animals. Now, wood was also used in the making of huts and tools. So these are the use of the stone tools and woods that we find that the hunter gatherers used, and these were act as a sort of evidence that we have to get information of the hunter gatherers. Now if we see this image, we can see that stone tools are used for digging the ground and collecting edible roots, stitching clothes made out of animal skin. So we see that here a person is using a stone tool to dig up the ground, and to collect the edible roots of a plant. And in this image we see that the person is using a stone tool to stitch clothes, using animal skins and so on. Now if we go at the next part, we see choosing a place to live in. Now if we see the map number 2, we see the sides that are marked with this red triangle. Now these were the places of the hunter-gatherer tribes. From these places we have find evidence of hunter-gatherers. Uh, so one thing is common in these sites is that they were located near source of water such as rivers and lakes. So this is a important point that we note, that mostly these hunter gatherers, they used to settle near the source of fresh water. As stone tools were important, so we see that people, these hunter gatherers, they generally tried to find places where good quality stone was easily available. So they needed good quality stone to make high quality tools, and the tools which would not break very easily. So they used to choose places where they could find high quality stone. And while trying to find these kind of stones, they often came across caves. Now caves were used as a shelter in those times, and there are instances of painting that we see on the cave wall. These are called cave painting or rock painting. Some of the best examples are in Madhya Pradesh and the southern Uttar Pradesh. Just examples in Madhya Pradesh and southern Uttar Pradesh. So if we see this picture down below, we can see that it is the Bhimbetka caves that is located in Madhya Pradesh. Now this site is a rock shelter. It used to provide shelter from the rain, heat and winds, and it is located close to the Narmada Valley. So such kind of caves were used for people to live in, and they also functioned as a source of stone to make tools. Now the next part we see what are sites. So sites are basically the place where the remains, archaeological remains are found. So these remains may be on the surface of the earth, or they may have been buried under the surface, or sometimes even under the water. Next is finding out about fire. If we look at the Kurnool caves on map 2, traces of ash have been found here. So if we see the map again, we can find that here is the Kurnool caves. So the traces of ash have been located in this site. So this indicates that there was a use of fire, and the people who were living there were familiar with the use of fire. As we talked earlier, that fire was a source of light. It was used to roast meat and scare away wild animals. So the next part, we see the blue box. It talks about names and dates. Now this is quite important. It talks about the different names that the archaeologists have given to the different portions of history, human history, that we see, the starting with the earliest period called the Paleolithic age. Now the word Paleolithic comes from two Greek words, that is paleo means old and lithos means stones. That this name, it suggests to the use of stone tools, and the time period of the Paleolithic age was from around 2 million years ago to about 12,000 years ago. So this is a very long period of time, and this has been divided into two parts. That is the into three parts. That is the lower, middle, and upper Paleolithic. And we also find that this whole Paleolithic age covers almost 99% of our human history. So it is quite significant. In the next period that we see the classification, there we notice several environmental changes from about 12,000 years ago to around 10,000 years ago. And this place is known as the Mesolithic age. That is, Mesolithic means Middle Stone Age. So this lithic, lithic, it comes from lithos, so it translates to stone. So paleo means old, meso is like middle, and lithic and everything means stone. So old stone age, middle stone age, and next we will see the new stone age, that is the Neolithic age. The Neolithic age, it was from about like 10,000 years ago. Also one thing, that in the Mesolithic age we see that very small stone tools were used. These were known as microliths. Such microliths were used in making of saws and sickles. These small tools were attached to a piece of wood or bone, and such complex tools were made. So in the next part we see a changing environment. So we see that around 12,000 years ago, that there was a major shift in the climate of the world. Relatively warm conditions led to a development of grassland and increase in the number of deer and antelope, goats, sheep, cattle, and animals that survived on the grass. So we see that due to the increase in temperature, grasslands developed, and this led to the increase in the herbivorous animals that lived off the grass, such as the deer, sheep, goat, and antelope, and all these. So it is likely that this helped people in start to think about herding and rearing these animals for themselves. Now, in this time, fishing also became an important source of food. So now we see the beginning of farming and herding. So we see that due to the growth of grassland, several grain-bearing grasses such as wheat, barley, and rice grew naturally in different parts of the subcontinent. Now people, they collected these grain bearing grasses, and they slowly they learnt about their pattern of growth and when they used to ripen, and this led to them to growing plants on their own. So in this gradual process, people became farmers. People also used to attract and tame animals by leaving food for them near their shelters. The first animal to be tamed was the wild ancestor of the dog. That we see, the modern day dog that we have tamed, the first ancestors were the wild ancestors of the modern day dog. Other animals such as sheep, goat, and cattle that used to live in herds, most of them used to eat grass, and people used to protect these tamed animals, from attack by other wild animals. Like this is the process, like which they became slowly herders. you know so we see that there is a question given here. Can you think of any reasons why the dog was perhaps the first animal to be tamed? So we can see that, as it is said here, that people used to leave food for them, and perhaps the dog that we see, they used to move in packs, that is in groups. They used to travel behind a group of hunter gatherers, because they used to get free food and it became an easy source of food for them. And slowly we see, if there was a building of trust, and thus the animal got tamed. Okay, so now we'll move to the next part. We see a box about domestication. Now this talks about the process of domestication, that is how people grow and look after plants and animals. you know for a species to be domesticated, people select the species of plants and animals that are not prone to disease. They also select plants that yield large size grain, and also have strong and capable land bearing the weight of ripe grain. So these kind of species are promoted by the farmers, so that they have more harvest and they can sustain themselves for a long time. And in the case of animals, we see that the relatively gentle animals that were selected for breeding. So gradually we see that, due to these traits becoming dominant in these domesticated animals, we see that the domesticated ones became slowly different from their wild counterparts. Now, this domestication process, it took very long time. It was a gradual process. It began about 12,000 years ago. Some of the earliest plants that were domesticated were wheat and barley, and the earliest domesticated animals include the sheep and goat. Now, the next part is a new way of life. We see that when people began growing plants, it means that they had to stay in the same place for a long time, looking after the plants, watering, weeding, driving away the animals and birds till the grains ripened. So we see that when people started, agriculture, they had to settle at a place for a long time. They had to look after their plants, that the seeds they have sown, and they had to water the plants, and wait for the seed to ripen. So we see that the grain were also stored both as food and seed. People started making large clay pots and wove baskets or dug pits in the ground. So, as a method of storing the foods and seeds, people started to make clay pots, large pots that were used to store these food and seed, or also they used to store food in pits under the ground. Do you think the hunter-gatherers would have made use of such use pots? Give reason for your answer. We see that since hunter-gatherers, they moved from one place to another in search of their food, and they lived off the land. So they didn't have any such reason, to store food for a long time. They just, if they were ever faced a crisis of a source of food, they moved from one place to another. So the next part is rearing of animals. Now, the animals were reared because they provide milk, which is an important source of food, and also because as a source of meat. So animals in a way were a storage of food, that is a store of food. Now, finding out about the first farmers and herders. Now, if you go to the map 2, we will see that blue squares are the evidence of early farmers and herders. These are mainly in the northwest part in the present day Kashmir, and in the south and east India. If we look at the map, so see that all these blue squares are places where evidence of agriculture has been found. We see that they are spread throughout India, and we can see that they are marked. You can see Neolithic sites. So in the next part, we see that in some of these sites there have been found remains of burnt grains. Now, these were perhaps accidentally left there or were left there on purpose. Now, these help scientists to identify these grains. Now, we could know about the type of crop or the number of crops that were grown in different parts of the subcontinent from these burnt remains. We could also, identify the bones of different animals. Towards a settled life, archaeologists have found traces of huts and houses at some sites. For instance, in Burza home, in present-day Kashmir, people built pit houses which were dug in the ground with steps leading into them. So we see that there have been traces of settled life, that traces of the pit house that we see found in Burza home in Kashmir. Here, the houses were dug in the ground with steps leading to them. We also see that there were evidence on cooking. So we see that depending on the weather, people used to cook food either inside or in the outdoors. We see different from earlier Paleolithic tools, and that is why they are called the Neolithic. These include tools that were polished to gain a fine cutting edge, and mortars, pestles used for grinding grains. So here we see also there are evidence of different kinds of tools. These tools are slightly different from the earlier Paleolithic tools. Now these were polished and had a finer cutting edge, and also there were evidence of mortar and pestles. These were used for grinding grain. Then we see that the tools of the Paleolithic continued to be made and used, and remember, some tools were also made of bone. Then we see that though these new tools were introduced, the older Paleolithic tools were still in use, and some other tools were made using bone. Here you can see that some of the new stone tools, these have, the edges have a sharper edge. We see these are shaped in a particular way, these are shaped like a big arrowhead. You see with the edges, it has been sharpened. Now many kinds of earthen pots have also been found. These were sometimes decorated and were used for storing things. People started using pots for cooking food like grain, rice, wheat, lentils. These became an important part of the diet. Beside all these activities, weaving using different kind of materials also became an important activity. Cotton was first used in this period. Now, men and women still continue to hunt and gather, and people adopted farming and herding slowly over thousands of years. So we see that all these changes did not take place everywhere and at the same time. So at some places, people were still living the hunter-gatherer life, and at some places, they had started to farm. They had started the farming activities. Now we see there is a particular case of Mehergarh. So if we look at the map, you could find Mehergarh. Here if you see, Mehergarh is located in the present day Pakistan region. So this site is located at the Bolan Pass, which is one of the most important routes into Iran. And Mehergarh was probably one of the places where people learned to grow barley and wheat, rear sheep and goats for the first time in this area. So we see that Mehergarh is an important Neolithic site. It is located at the Bolan Pass, which is near Iran, and it is also one of the first places where people learned to grow wheat and barley. So bones of wild animals such as the deer, pig have also been found, and bones of sheep and goat have been found in this place. So we see that at Mehergarh there are also the remains of rectangular houses. Some of the houses may have been divided into these, rectangular shapes. You see, with different compartments, three or four compartments, and these may have been used as a storage room. And now we will see about the burial practices that we have seen. The people used to believe in some form of life after death. So burial is one such arrangement. Several burials have been found at Mehergarh. There is one particular instance. At one burial, we find a dead person was buried with goats, which was probably meant to serve as food in the next world. So this is the chapter this is the second chapter of the NCRT. So we will look at some of the keywords. Hunter-gatherer. This is the people who used to move from one place to another in search of food. The site is, the archaeological sites. The habitation, the place where people live. A factory is, a workshop, where tools are made. Paleolithic, it is the old Stone Age. Mesolithic, it is the middle Stone Age. Small stone tools were used. These were known as microliths. And in the second section, we see about the microliths. Domestication is, the process of taming wild animals and plants. Farmers, the people who started farming and staying at a place, growing their crops. Herders are the peoples who slowly tamed and domesticated herds of wild animals. Neolithic is the new Stone Age, where new kind of stone tools with sharper edges and different shapes were found. And the burials are the different burial practices that we see. These indicate to the people of the belief of people in a life after death. So there are some important dates. The Mesolithic age from around 12,000 to 10,000 years. The beginning of domestication about 12,000 years ago. The beginning of settlement at Mahargarh about 8,000 years ago. The beginning of the Neolithic age about 10,000 years ago. So these are some of the important dates. You could look these up to get to revise the chapter. So this brings us to the end of this chapter. So if you have any doubt regarding this chapter, you can write in the comments and give your suggestions regarding what could be improved in this video. So please, if this video was any benefit to you, please like, share, and subscribe to the YouTube channel. And I will meet you with the next chapter. Thank you.